I think the future of analytics is more conversational. We are getting into this phase of not spending more time in looking for information by ourselves, but it's all in one UI. So it's more insight driven rather than the numbers driven.
Hello, fellow insight seekers. Welcome to the Curiosity Current, a podcast that's all about navigating the exciting world of market research. I'm Stephanie Vance.
And I'm Matt Mahan. Join us as we explore the ever-shifting landscape of consumer behavior and what it means for brands like yours.
Each episode will get swept up in the trends and challenges facing researchers today, riding the current of curiosity towards new discoveries and deeper understanding.
Along the way, we'll tap into the brains of industry leaders, decode real-world data, and explore the tech that's shaping the future of research.
So whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting your feet wet, we're excited to have you on board.
So with that, let's jump right in.
Today, we're delighted to welcome Saket Kumar, VP of Consumer Analytics at Citi and a trailblazer in the world of data science and analytics. Saket has an impressive background that spans industries like aerospace, energy, and finance, with a passion for harnessing advanced analytics and AI to drive innovation and empower teams.
From building digital frameworks at Arcadis to leading transformative projects at Citi, Saket has a deep understanding of how technology like generative AI is shaping data analytics and customer experience. Today, we'll dive into his expertise on how large language models like GPT are revolutionizing analytics, bridging enterprise knowledge systems, and driving actionable insights. Saket, welcome.
Oh, sure. Thank you for your kind words, though.
Of course, we're really happy to have you. So just jumping right in, Saket, your career journey has been pretty extraordinary and unique, spanning a lot of different industries. You've been in aerospace, you've been in energy, you've been in finance, all while staying really at the forefront of analytics and innovation in analytics. What really sparked your interest in data science and analytics? How has your perspective on its potential evolved over the years?
Oh, sure. So my journey in data science and Gen AI and artificial intelligence, it has been intertwined with my curiosity of how data shapes the world and the power of AI to extract the meaningful insights. It all started back after my engineering in aerospace, and my starting career was into data engineering. And in 2013, there was a whole shift of paradigm to cloud computing, where the traditional database warehousing was transitioned to this whole cloud architecture to scale like real-time analytics. So I was part of a big aerospace client where I worked with them to transition their traditional data warehouse to a cloud databases through which they can monitor in real time how jet engines are performing in real time. So yeah, I mean, that's how the career started. Like for 2 years, I worked as like data engineer. Then I moved to automotive industry where it was more on the data analytics and statistical analysis of finding the failures of the models, like where the equipments of automotive industries and parts, like they are like creating the survival models to make sure that the vendors are actually supplying parts so we can assess their quality with that. So that actually helped the industry to also gauge the performance of their parts and also increase their revenue. I think like these two were my setting step to start my career in. And then it went into something really beautiful where I got the opportunity to work in the energy and the environmental sector in Washington, D.C., where I was leveraging data science and AI for water commission, for transportation planning, for traffic planning, and also like environmental remediations. These projects were very like impactful when it comes to improving the quality of life for the people, like what we talk about. So kind of like AI for good. So that's where I saw that shift. Going from there, I worked for almost 4 years in that industry and then moved to finance and marketing. So now I'm leveraging more of the Gen AI capabilities to transform how the complete data analytics can revive through the power of Gen AI and large language models, what we talk about. So it has been pretty exciting journey to be here.
That's very cool. So, in full transparency, I don't consider myself a data scientist at all. So like a lot of the questions I will have for you, you're going to feel like, you're explaining what you do for a living to your parents or something. Give me an example of like how you have used like a large language model such as GPT to really change the way an organization that you've sat in has approached data analytics? Like, what does that intersection look like?
Yeah, so that intersection is actually based on the power of large language models. So, just to set that up, right, there was a very transformational or a very disruptive shift in 2021 when this GPT got released in the market, and then ChatGPT came like later on top of it. The power of these models like is about it can understand your questions like humans. It can orchestrate and create tasks like what to do based on those questions, and then it can write content on top of it. So it really has these three key structure to it, which is so much powerful like compared to before with the traditional deep learning models used to, because it used to just perform one task at one time, right? These like what we call it like a large foundational models. So it's just one model which does a lot of things at once. But just like a paradigm shift, if we talk about it. And as an organization to leverage something so powerful, it can become like very intensive when it comes to, and a lot of organizations can fall into this kind of pits of investing in something which might not drive your revenue because there is something cost that comes with it. So the best approach to start with it was to focus on using AI as a thought leader rather than a task doer, right? So thought leader and also as a thought partner. So now you can actually engage with these models and talk to them, and they can be your co-pilot. So doing data analytics or any kind of summarization of reports. So we took these kind of models, and one of the basic things that what we were trying to work on was like conversational reporting, which is like I will say like 80% of the data task in any organization is all about like reporting and data visualizations, and these are like regular reports that come into. So that's the really, like a good area to focus and leverage Gen AI, which can solve most of the problem. So one of these things where large language models are really good is to understand your question and translate that into a data question. Right. So you have like a lot of like big data tables like lying behind all these companies, like data warehouses, like data lakes. And what Gen AI can actually do is to translate your question into a data question, or maybe and it can generate like a SQL statements, like a code for that question, retrieve that information and create textual insights, create like data visualizations, like dynamic. So now you're reporting to look at each dashboard, like hundreds of dashboards, that just boils down to one conversational UI. And you can ask whatever question you can have. And then it can create a data story as well to find what are the, like outliers that you're seeing, why is trend going up, why trend is going down. So find out these key drivers that can drive that. So that actually brings down the time to insights like really, really fast, which is where the leadership, like gets a lot of value out of that to drive and understand the numbers in like a very short amount of time.
It's great. Yeah. And we definitely see that in our own business too. So it's definitely something that we can relate to and have found to be, a big time saver. And I love that idea of a thought partner more than an executional, arm for you. So this next question, it may be a little bit redundant with some of what Matt was asking about, but I'm just really curious, like if we zoom out a little bit, how and think about like current state and how adoption looks. How are you seeing generative AI or LLMs like GPT shifting the way that businesses are actually right now approaching data analytics? So not only in your role, but like when you think about the, industries more broadly. And I think I'm especially curious if you think there are specific capabilities of LLMs that have become like the lowest hanging fruit organizations that are like the most immediate to adopt and see value in.
Oh, sure. Like starting with the like how these adoption can be increased is to first, I would say there will be requirement of a organizational change. It's kind of like a change management process because it's a new kind of technology. Most of the employees end up like not having AI background. They can get stuck to how to use that, right? So I think like in my organization itself, like we started with a lot of like training modules, like bringing in AI innovation partners from the industry and like engaging the workforce to learn how to use AI not to like become like developers, because that's a different area to go into, but you don't need really a development background to learn how to use these tools. Most of these tools are very, like they have the capability to do these tasks. It's just that you should know how these models understand and respond. How do you want to provide a set of instruction like in a clean and concise way, giving a lot of context? I think like that knowledge the workforce needs to be trained on, like how to interact with AI, especially with these kind of models. And most of the organizations should also, like, to increase the adaptability of Gen AI, they should start working on these co-pilot projects first, where AI is working side by side abreastly with the workforce, and it is improving their, like the efficiency of the operations rather than, like doing, like replacing their task itself. So that can help the employee and the workforce to have more reliability and, trust in AI if they end up like working with AI for a long time. And once they are comfortable, then organizations should shift the gears towards like product engineering, more on the product design. And because by that co-pilot journey, most of the organizations can learn the pits and falls, like where it can go wrong, where it is performing well and where it's not. So then you take all that learning and then you start like creating these products specifically to perform tasks where AI is not just your co-pilot, but it is actually giving you and like doing tasks for you. So it's not just a thought partner, now it's an action taker as well. So I would say that three-step chronologically, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of organizations, if they just start with like product design, they have lesser idea what will work for them and what will not, and they will always end up spending a lot of money in these proof of concepts, and which will not even serve the need. So I would definitely suggest like following like these three paths, like in their subsequent order.
Makes sense.
I'm curious, in the research world that like Stephanie and I sit in, AI, generative AI, LLMs is like all people can talk about, right? It's like it's definitely the hottest new thing, whether the organization hates the idea and is just, completely adverse to, they think robots are coming for our jobs, or they've really embraced AI in really meaningful ways. It's really like a spectrum and anywhere in between. I'm curious if you see the same thing from your perspective in data science. Like, are there different personas when it comes to AI? Like, are you seeing organizations that are really reluctant to lean into it versus some organizations that are really embracing it? Overall, when it comes to data science, do you think that role is making the most out of the AI tools that are at their disposal today?
Yeah. So I think a bit of reluctancy is good for some of the organization. And I can definitely say this reluctancy comes from the fact that data warehouse or the information that they want to train these Gen AI models are not organized enough, right? So a really good data governance and a really robust data management policies, if they are not in shape in any big organizations, and mostly I'm talking about the big corps, that's where you have like a huge amount of data sets, like which are not like really regulated most of the time, and that can impact your product, like Gen AI product engineering a lot. And especially when you will end up like getting all these falling into thick falls and pits of this, where the information that your Gen AI will be trained on is not good enough. So it will not be serving the task that you are like working on. So I think like that reluctancy is good to have, just to start with metadata management properly and managing your tables. Because if you see the journey, like how data analytics is evolving, we started with like Excel like 15, 20 years ago. That was like siloed Excel spreadsheet all over. Then business intelligence came in, and the beauty of business intelligence was not just a live dashboard, but also it actually pushed the organizational leaders to create a really robust data governance, to manage tables, to manage their relationships. And then came AI, right? And with AI, your responsibility of managing data is even more important than it was ever before. So that's where I think the more AI like being evolved like all the time, the better data governance that you will need. So now the organizations need to manage their structured data sets and also manage their metadata, like the information about your data, like really efficiently, and also the unstructured data sets that they have, like in terms of the reports. So it really needs like really good management to even be able to get into this kind of like shift in the industry.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's such a good point about there's a lot of work beforehand that needs to be done before you can really leverage these tools to their fullest extent. Another challenge that we often hear discussed with generative AI is balancing the accessibility of information, which we have a wealth of things at our fingertips that can be summarized so easily and quickly, and analyses that I couldn't run on my own, but that, with the right script, I can. And so, this beautiful democratization of data and insights, but we also need to balance that with accuracy and avoiding oversimplification or misrepresentation, especially among people who are not experts in that domain. And we know that that's what generative AI is going to allow people to do, is for other people within the org to be able to put on that analytics hat and that, insights hat. And so I guess, what strategies have you seen work well? And I'm thinking too, like, you work in finance, which is such a high stake industry. How do you think about tackling that balance of accessibility with like accuracy and proper representation?
Yeah. So there are like 3 to 4 ways to handle these kind of scenarios, especially generative AI or like large language models are prone to hallucinations because they are trained on like so much vast amount of data and it's just one model. So chances of like creating its own context without just focusing on your context is very much possible. So in the organizations, I think two approaches are very viable and easy to, implement as well. One is like a hybrid model, which is your product is not just based on large language models, but it has some rule-based systems itself as like checkpoints, which can at every step, you have to push in some of these kind of controls of making sure that all of these steps, like step by step, what LLM is doing, is getting traced and also being evaluated through these rules. And if they violate these rules, then you should not like respond or ask for more context or more questions. So that hybrid model is something which product design team should always have this in place to build this like checks in terms of automating this control of Gen AI or like large language model responses. The others like really good approach is explainability mechanism, right? So whenever Gen AI gives a response, the product design team should also think about that it should also like explain itself that how did this answer was generated by large language model. So we call it like traceability. So you can create these traces. So if I ask a question like why is my accounts are performing low in last 30 days, it will create that task, find that answer, but then also in traces, it will show me like I did step one this because so it's kind of like having a reasoning because large language models also work chain of thoughts, right? So it's like one thought after each thought. So it really has that capability to explain itself. So these two features in any product will really help. The other two approaches are, I would say it's like very case to base, like case to case base. One is human in the loop, like HITL approaches, where if it depends upon how the organization like runs that operation, but that can also help. And through AI based models, you can also fine tune your models. There are different ways like fine tuning, or you can also use something called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generated techniques, which can ground your AI knowledge to just focus on what it is supposed to do and not like hallucinate outside the rails. But definitely these 4 techniques can help you to make sure that accuracy is met and it is not producing any response which is wrong.
That's great. Yeah, thanks.
I'm curious. I just want to ask you flat out. Well, I'll take a step back. I think, again, looking at like the research consumer insight space, I would say, and Stephanie, you can agree or disagree with me on this point. I'd be curious. But when we think about how we're using AI tools, oftentimes our conversations sound more like an evolution of the role of the market researcher. So it's the market researcher now has these new capabilities. Their expectations of them are going to change. Their daily work profile is going to change. But they're still going to be there at the desk conducting market research. Of course, there are fears about displacement and all that. But I think, at least from my view in consumer insights, largely we've been looking at AI tools as an augmentation of our capabilities. I'm curious if you see it the same way in data science. Is it a superpower? Is it an augmentation? Or is there a risk for displacement?
Yeah, I think it's more of like redefining the roles rather than replacing the roles. Of course, so like once an organization puts Gen AI products in place, a lot of tasks, like repetitive tasks, can become automated. For which, if you needed like 10 employees, you can do the same task in like 3 employees. So, in terms of replacement, I won't say it will really replace a lot, but it will create a new kind of or a new way how the data analyst or data scientists work in the industry right now. Because traditionally, data scientists and data analysts spent a lot of time just pulling the information at the first place. And that used to be like 60% of the tasks where they have to just get the information, and then 20-30% of the time that they have, they will invest in creating insights, like building these models and everything. But now I think that getting the information is faster. So the data scientists and data analysts now have to transition their roles from data pullers to actually strategic advisors, because now they have enough time to work and like redefine the insights, right? And they can focus more on like designing AI driven workflows and refining like model output. So it's kind of like more efficiency. But of course, that's kind of like paradigm shifts that we are seeing in. And the workforce also has to make sure that they are learning these tools like really well, because now the roles will be shifting to becoming like more of like insight architect, I would say, rather than data analyst. So that's where I think it's going. So, I mean, in short, it will elevate the data teams completely, and it will like free them from repetitive tasks and enable them to have these kind of high value strategic work.
That's what we see a lot in research as well. Like, it's no longer good enough to just report the news and provide what was found. It's like the expectations now are you should be able to spend more time on crafting the story and, being able to sell in recommendations in a really kind of impactful, more consultative way, which for a lot of like research analysts, I know that's just a total, like you were saying, a total mindset change. So it's been interesting to see.
That's largely positive, right? Like that's such a positive, like I think framing of generative AI and the power that it brings. Because I don't think I've ever met a researcher who was like, no, I just want to process this data set to get it into the right shape for the end. You know what I mean? Like that's the parts that we do because we have to. And so I think the more that we can think of this as a tool and a co-pilot and thought partner and really do that more strategic work, the more exciting that it gets. So Kate, to kind of like switch gears a little bit, as companies are starting to embed these models into their analytics processes, data privacy and governance are becoming ever more critical issues. And they were critical before, but we are certainly finding that the expectations from clients, the kinds of certifications that they're expecting, the kinds of concerns that they show up with as relates to data privacy are, order of magnitude higher in this current world order. And I'm curious, what best practices or frameworks have you found or do you believe are essential to ensuring that we're being ethical and responsible in using these technologies?
Yeah, sure. I think like AI governance is not an option. Like it's a must thing that should be followed, especially when one model is having all these contexts, like generating context, generating contents. There are chances that it can leak a lot of information, right? So one of the way is always having like zero trust AI architecture when creating these products, like leveraging large language models, which actually means having access control management in place. And especially in an organization, we'll call it like RBAC. It's like role-based access control, where every role or the user has a persona and they have access to only information what they're allowed to. And that's like really critical to, like mask your data sets based on who is using it and not provide any information. And also, while using these large language models, you can also have while fine-tuning and training. You can also think about like removing all the personal sensitive information like PII. So that should be like always removed while fine-tuning these, or it should not be considered as a part of what LLM is like learning on. The other way is also to have this explainability feature, what I talked about before, having traces that it should also explain itself while creating a response. So even if there is any, like a wrong or a misinformation coming out of it, someone can go and like control and audit that information, like why this particular information was generated, and it should not be consumed because the way this product has thought about it is not right way. That also brings in a really important role of like cybersecurity audits, where all of your responses coming from this Gen AI product should also be regulated by control and audit team. They have to analyze all these like logs, right? What was like asked for and what it responds. And going from here, organizations should also think of creating these kind of quality metrics of analyzing these responses, like in the historical responses, and assign like a score that these kind of questions are answered well, some kind of questions are not answered well, or the information is not right. So maybe it needs a little bit of fine tuning that, right? So that kind of cybersecurity audits should really be a part of your Gen AI product and how it operates. The other ways is to just build a data infrastructure if your information is really sensitive, especially in finance. If you see that data infrastructure, you should not go on cloud completely. Of course, you should have more of the on-premise solution if there is any risk of like data being like leaked or being threatened by the external factors.
That makes a lot of good sense. I didn't hear this come up yet, and so I would be very curious to hear you talk about it if you don't mind. Do you foresee the regulatory landscape evolving and how, as generative AI becomes more integrated and we're all thinking about these things around data privacy and governance?
Yeah, I think like regulatory landscape is also evolving. Like it needs to be evolved, like to control how AI is understanding and creating content at all the time. So there's definitely need for like policing kind of how these are working and interacting with your data. As of now, like we don't have any like GDPR. Like Europe has like GDPR, but we don't have like something equivalent to that, which is like that impactful. But definitely government will push going ahead to have more regulatory standards to actually monitor like how AI is consuming your information and how it is generating or creating insights like for all of the businesses. One of the critical way that organizations should think also about is to how to use like differential privacy. So you can still like understand your consumer without getting their sensitive data into your databases, right? So these kind of, I think, architectures like differential privacy are like really required, and somehow like government should take a push and like make sure that organizations are leveraging these kind of architectures in their product to make sure that data is like safe and secure, especially of the consumers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great call. Sounds like it's a really, you mentioned a lot of responsibility on your IT and cybersecurity teams, and then obviously your legal and regulatory team. It sounds like, one of the good indicators of success in rolling out a successful utilization of LLMs is having this really good cross-functional alignment, right? I'm curious, what are the common barriers that you have seen to preventing an organization from doing this well from a data science side? What have been the common trip ups?
Oh, sure. I would say the biggest barriers that I have seen is like the lack of data unification, and especially in the big corporations, because of the vast amount of data, it's not like seamlessly tied. So for a large language model to understand your data sets, which is very fragmented, and that's always, like a pain point for any organization where they have a really seamless integration of data sets and curated information. So if large language model goes and it tries to learn, it has all kind of, it's not like learning from one table, but it's also like correlating a lot of information across your silo data sets. So I think that's one of the barriers. The organizations should like definitely invest in unifying their data layer, which is for Gen AI. So that's also like really interesting when we talk about it. So before we used to have a business intelligence layer for reporting. Now I think with Gen AI, we'll need an additional, more intelligent databases and layers, which is more connected. It is like more ingestible by large language models. So I think Gen AI data layer will be a key thing like going into the future where our org will try to, like get into that workspace. The other thing is computational cost. It's very expensive. Like each and every question that you ask, it comes with like some sense of cost per tokens. So tokens are your each word in your whatever context or response you are getting. So to process this information, there's a cost. So if in an organization there are like 1,000 employees, 500 of them like firing 20 queries every day, that has a cost to it. And especially with the large language models, you will need to invest in lots of like digital infrastructure, like your servers. You'll need a lot of memory to store your data sets, so that's one of the key things as well. Apart from these technology barriers, I would say there's also an organizational barrier in terms of the employees or workforce, like having this resistance of change to adapt to this, having not much trust into these AI tools, which is why Copilot is really necessary. This kind of projects to kick off engaging your workforce to work with AI as a side by side and increase your efficiency, see that impact in your work for 1 year, and then leveraging those learnings into a product. And also like training your workforce, that's also like really important. Most of the workforces that we see in organizations are not AI. They don't have like background in AI. So it's also like really important for them to be trained with bringing in partners from AI innovation leads and the companies.
Great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an area that I'm particularly interested in that I'd love to pick your brain about. So, as you know, LLMs are continuing to evolve. I'm really curious about their application to what I think of as foresight, which is, predictive, but then also prescriptive analytics. Like, hey, this is me impersonating AI. Hey, I know what you need to build next, right? And then actual strategy and innovation work. And I'm really, really fascinated by that potential. And so I'm curious if you think that, like, is that on the horizon? Is it here? Is it the kind, like, do you think generative AI is going to be massively impactful to organizations in those ways?
So sure, absolutely. Like large language models are evolving from descriptive analytics to predictive and prescriptive as well, right? So that's where I would see with descriptive, I would say we are already in the place. Gen AI can like definitely do descriptive analytics for you without any prompt or fine tuning your models. Gen AI has some limitations when it comes to predictive models and prescriptive models. The reason being not the inefficiency of the Gen AI or large language models, but the inability of them to understand your business or your, like the key objectives by themselves, right? So prescriptive models, let's say if I am just trying to say that, okay, predict if my acquisitions of customers is going to fall in like next 30 days and what should I do about it? So then Gen AI or large language models to even suggest you like what action should you take if it sees your trend going down for acquisitions of customers, it needs to know your business strategies as well. So that needs for the organization to also not just give them structured data that what's going on, but also understand, like make the large language models understand how the business strategy also works. So that's where it's not just a structured data, but you will also need a lot of metadata, unstructured data set training to these models. So from where it can learn and it can also like create numbers like KPIs and also suggest actions based on each KPI. So that's why we need a more intelligent data learning of like different sources, like from marketing, from digital, from tech, from product, I think like at one place. So that's where I think it will go. And once you have that information, of course, large language models have the ability to understand those scenarios and plan those scenarios likewise as what you require. And it can give you recommendations for sure. But the process of making or like making these like models learn your strategies is kind of like the more bigger barrier, I would say, than large language models like giving our recommendations.
So it's not just something I can put into my AI data layer, like our company vision and mission and what our KPIs are. I can't just provide that and then expect it to have all the context it needs at this point. Like we're not quite there yet.
We are quite not there. And also it's because every KPI in every organization, it's not generalized, but because when we talk about AI, we talk about a generalized AI. Like what is going on in Citi, it might not be same what is going on. Like Goldman Sachs, they have their own different business strategy. So that's where AI needs to be like it needs to be fine-tuned to your needs and your information rather than having this generalized information, which is kind of like we have to balance that. A generalized information learning is also really good because then it can do a lot of tasks which are like general tasks. But if you we cannot like completely remove that, because if you remove that, then we'll end up with very, like a hard coded problem, right? So there needs to be a balance between a generalized AI and also it is aware of your context. So that's where like RAG, retrieval augmented generated, like these kind of techniques are really good to have, which makes sure that all these responses are grounded to your information and then connect, and it can then orchestrate these informations like really well.
Very cool.
It's a great point that it needs to be individualized, at least to some extent, to have any level of validity, which makes one of my last questions seem kind of ridiculous. But I'm curious, if you had to imagine, how good can it get for a data professional like yourself? So imagine a landscape where these tools have been integrated seamlessly into your analytics workflows. What would that look like in an ideal state for the end user?
Yeah, no, sure. I think the future of analytics is more conversational. We are getting into this phase of not spending more time in like looking for information by ourselves, but it's all in like one UI. So, and it's like more insight driven rather than like the numbers driven. I would say it will also enable teams in future where data management can be completely revived, especially like writing codes, creating like retrieving information from different tables. These co-pilots will completely revolutionize these data migration, data creation like tasks as well, rather than like just giving insights as well, right? Which is a lot of revenue savings for big organizations because they also spend a lot just to, like manage the information. I would say in terms of how, like good it can get is like a voice enabled analytics. So you can imagine something like Siri or Alexa, where you can just talk to your data in that way and just ask the questions, and it can just explain to you things like while you are just going in a subway or, like driving somewhere, and you can still talk to your data and like just be informed all the time. So that's like a very real time voice enabled like insight generator, right? So that's where I think it will go in future. There are a few companies which have already worked on that. One of them is Pyramid Analytics, where they have like used this kind of voice enabled feature in their reporting purpose, which was also, like a new way of like looking at your insights. So I would say it will go somewhere there.
Seriously getting close to the Star Trek future that all of us nerds want to become reality, right?
Sure.
Right. And we don't have to be nerds to use it at that point, right? Just the natural language querying. Yeah. It's built for people like me. So the question is like, I'm trying to time this topic to the audience of our podcast, which will largely be consumer insights professionals and market researchers. Just thinking about how can we be better partners with our data science and our like business intelligence type of partners in the business to sort of use these tools in a way that's coherent and cohesive and allows us to be successful together.
Of course. So data scientist and data analyst, right? So their role in Gen AI product engineering is like really crucial, right? So, but the creation of this product and how they are made cannot be made like completely successful until the users groups like marketing, researchers, or the digital sales teams, like these kind of teams, they partner with the data scientists like really well. Especially what we need in these kind of scenarios is more understanding of each other's work. Like marketing researchers should be open and explain how their operations work. So, because that's also a key, because your analytical life cycle should match your operations life cycle. So that's what data science and product teams will need to understand from the business users so that they can create these products based on, like a really good product user experience, because user experience is the key metric for your adoption. If user experience is bad, then of course the adoptions will go like a lot down. So that kind of meetings, like having scrums, like weekly scrums to understand each other's work, that's really important in these scenario. And also like sharing of the information across, that's also like a good way to have that.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Staying in the loop and staying aligned and making sure everyone has access to the same information. That's a common theme I think we hear when we're talking to cross-functional business partners for sure. I think that's all we have. I mean, I have our last question. I don't know if we would keep this in here or not. And I know we're at time, but I think we already hit it. Basically it's just asking what's kind of your one piece of advice that you would leave the audience with. But I think we've worked that into really all of the other questions that we went through. We put you through the ringer. So we appreciate you sticking with it and giving us such a wonderful, detailed download on kind of what you see happening in the industry.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today. We appreciate your time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you for the invite. I really like the conversations. And no, yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful like how Gen AI is like impacting the market and in a couple of years. And I can definitely say that the world will be like really different, like how the business organizations are like working and generating revenues in terms of getting insights. That's gonna like shift a lot. So
For sure. Yeah, come back and talk to us then. Okay.
sure, definitely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Take care.
The Curiosity Current is brought to you by AYTM.
To find out how AYTM helps brands connect with consumers and bring insights to life, visit AYTM.com.
And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the Curiosity Current in Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.